What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about the LG G7 and seeing pretty much how it holds up in the later part of 2019. Now this phone isn't super old, it literally was just released last year, so it's about a year and a half old. It came out in 2018 in May, and I can tell you I've never seen a phone have so much depreciation in like 1 year of its release. This thing came out, whatever it was costing, I think it was like $8.99 on release. It was super expensive, and then literally you can probably pick one up now for like $100 or $150. Like, it's so bad how much depreciation this phone hit, and I have a couple reasons as to why, but overall, what I can tell you, man, this phone isn't a bad phone. I think a lot of people I think the problem is a lot of people overlook this phone because when you think of like the flagship phones that you should recommend and buy, a lot of people don't even think of like the LG G7 or even the LG G8 right now. You know, nobody's saying, oh, buy the G8. I see some like posts sometimes on Reddit of like people like recommending it, but very rarely. Like, it's like one every like 30 posts. It's like phone recommendations, it's like an LG phone, so, and even that might be way too high. But looking on the front, we have a 6.1 inch IPS panel, and I don't know why they used IPS panels for so long. Ever since the G2 that I owned, that was a pretty good panel. That was a 1080p panel, but it was the IPS, and while all the other, phone manufacturers were using OLED panels and better panels, they were still stuck on LCD for some reason. And it's not a bad panel. I think this is probably one of the best IPS panels I've ever seen, but still, at the end of the day, it's an IPS panel. I feel like they could have done way better by putting an OLED panel, which they eventually did with the LG G8. Now this panel is 1440p with 564 pixels per inch, and like I stated, dude, a very, very good panel. There's really nothing I hate about it besides it not being OLED. I think they did a really good job with this. It looks super great. The colors do kind of seem a little bit on the cooler side, but I just reviewed the G6 too, and I can tell you this panel was always super good in my opinion, and a little bit warmer on the colors as well. Now you do have that DAC or audio DAC, whatever it is, so that the audio quality is a little bit better on here, I'm assuming, so that's great. On the back you can see we have a dual camera setup as well as that fingerprint sensor, and I always like that fingerprint sensor right there. The G7, the G6 had it, the G5 had it, I believe. Yeah, the G5 had it. Tons of phones have had it, the Pixels, and now we're starting to get away from it, but I really hope phone manufacturers keep the fingerprint sensor somewhere on their phone, whether inbuilt into the display or outside, wherever the case is. I hope they keep the fingerprint sensors. I really, really do like that. You have an IR blaster, USB Type-C, as well as the headphone jack. So that's really all we have going on at the outside. It's nothing too crazy. On the front, I mean, like I stated, you have that notch, which is kind of good. It's kind of slim, but you also have that bottom bezel. So it doesn't look like the most premium phone in the world, but it definitely doesn't feel like a cheap phone either. It feels pretty good. You have glass on the back. It just feels like a very well-built phone. I don't feel any like creakiness. I don't feel any like cheap parts to it. So that's good. But I don't know. There's just something about it that kind of rubs me the wrong way. It definitely looks better than like a Pixel 3 XL or something, but I don't know. I just can't put my finger on it. So that's pretty much covers it up in the outside. Now on the software side of things, this thing was released with Android Oreo. You are able to get Android Pie on it. I'm pretty sure it's getting Android 10. I don't see why it wouldn't. That's only like one version of Android it got. But LG, they're usually super slow with their software updates. They do nothing. I don't know why they take so long, because all these other phone manufacturers are already on their game. And by the time the next version comes out, they're starting to push the previous version. So I don't know why they do that. I think I just saw that the G6 just got Android Pie or something like that. So it's like, why did they take so long to do this? Just hurry up, get that software out. If there's bugs in it, you fix it through a software update. That's how things go. But they just take so long to refine it. I don't know why they take that long to begin with, but this phone is getting Android 10, I'm sure, but I just don't know when. Maybe if LG's made an announcement after this video or something, then maybe we know. But as of right now, I don't think they have made anything, which is not that big of a deal, but it's just kind of weird that they don't support their phones too long. However, like I've stated, and I actually have personal experience with my LG G2 and my G3, when I was using them as a main phone, I used the G3 for like 2 days as a main phone. I still custom ROM'd it and I rooted it, and I threw some really nice custom ROMs. With that G2, I had like Android Marshmallow ROM, I think, at the time, and it ran very, very well. And the issue is you just have to kind of, figure out which one works for you. There's so many ROMs out there. Some are more stable than others. So you just have to kind of play around with it and see which one you like at the end of the day. What I will say though is that with this specific phone, there are ROMs out for it. There's a root out for it. I just don't think there's a huge development community for it. Something like a Nexus 5, or Nexus 6P or even Pixels. There's way more development for those phones in the third-party world than the G7. but there's still a few developers out there for the G7. So if you get this phone, you can easily find like an Android Pie ROM or Android Oreo ROMs, whatever you want to do. There will be more Android 10 ROMs now. I think there's a few, but there's going to be more once the time comes and more people get, their hands on the G7 per se. So in terms of software, you're pretty much, getting the next version of Android. I just don't know when. It might be when Android 11 comes out. That's when Android 10 comes out for this thing. So not a big deal, but you can always go and custom ROM it if you want to. You can have that capability on this phone. So that pretty much covers that. Let's go and move on to the performance side of things. This thing has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chipset, an octa-core CPU, and Adreno 630 GPU. With two variants, the 64GB variant has 4GB of RAM, the 128GB model has 6GB of RAM, and luckily for you, there is a microSD card slot on this thing, which I like a lot. Even though the base storage and the max storage aren't really that high, you have that capability to expand the storage with that microSD card slot, which I really like. And in terms of performance, like I've stated before with other phones, man, in this caliber, it's a good performing phone. I think the only problem with this phone is LG's UI. I think it has one of the weirdest UIs ever. I don't know what they were thinking. It's such a childish, I feel like I'm 30 years old when I'm using this. I don't like doing that. It's just very bulky and it feels like TouchWiz, from Android KitKat. That's literally what it feels like. And I feel like that in and of itself bogs down a lot of potential of what this phone could be. So when I'm going through things, when I'm opening apps and let's go into Snapchat or the web browser, going through things, I don't see that much performance loss. I think it's a pretty decent performing phone at the end of the day. Even higher intensive games and apps, they seem to be working just fine, but it's just something about it. When I'm using it, when I'm going through things, it just doesn't feel like I'm going through a super premium phone. This thing was a flagship phone at a time, and it just doesn't really give me the impression that it is, at least now anymore. I'm sure if you flashed a stock custom ROM on it, it'd be great, but it's just something about it just kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I'm sure it's the UI, I'm sure it's something, but in terms of the performance itself, it's not bad. It still holds up very well. But like I stated, hopefully with time, they can go and fix, with Android 10, a lot of the UI problems that we're having. I will say with heavier intensive gaming, this phone, like I've stated with other LG phones, it does heat up a little bit, but that's kind of, give and take. You should expect that with a phone of this caliber, a phone of, playing an intensive game like that. But overall, I can tell you the performance side of things is good enough. Even now and going forward, I think you're going to be set. Even when this phone is unsupported, you can still go and update your apps through the app store, so it's going to be fine. So at the end of the day, I think this phone's a pretty good performer still. Nothing to brag about, but it's still good in my opinion. So let's go and hit on the cameras. Now this phone has two 16 megapixel lenses on the back. You have a wide angle lens and an ultra wide angle lens. And I can definitely say this camera is super cool, and I actually like this. And it's funny because the Pixel 4 and 4 XL just came out, and that has two cameras on the back, a wide angle lens and a telephoto lens. And a lot of people have been saying an ultra wide sensor would be better. And it's funny that this phone not only has that ultra wide sensor, but this phone can also shoot 4K at 60 frames per second, where the Google Pixel 4 XL cannot do that. That's one of the biggest problems with the Pixel 4 XL, is that it cannot shoot 4K at 60 frames. It can shoot 4K at 30 frames, but this phone, the LG G7 that came out a year ago that nobody really talks about, that phone can still shoot 4K at 60 frames. So I don't know what they were thinking. It's kind of funny that this even happened, but what I can tell you is the camera on the back is still very good. I think it's a very, very good camera. I heard the recording of the audio is very good as well. I didn't really test that with my testing. I will say LG has very good camera sensors, from even stemming back from the original LGs and the G2s and G3s. Those phones always had great cameras. It's just everything surrounding that phone just kind of, just isn't really that good. But this camera, without a doubt, is very good. The front camera is very, very average. It's 8 megapixel sensor. You can do 1080p at 60 frames per second, so that's nice. But overall, the camera sensor, in my opinion, I really do like. I think it's still pretty competitive, and I think if you're going to use it, I don't think you're going to have anything to complain about. Moving on to the battery life, this thing has a 3000 mAh battery on the back. It does have wireless charging, which is nice, but I don't think this is a decent sized battery for this phone. I think it's very average. When I was using it, I was getting very average standby time, very average usage time, and it's not the end of the world or anything, and especially this thing uses USB Type-C, so it's kind of convenient at that. but it is more annoying than anything else because you can go and, you'd be using your phone and, this phone is a year old. The battery's probably degraded a little bit. It's probably like 2800. But when you have a phone when it's like spec this high at that time, and even now, and you have, a 6.1 inch display, 1440p, you should expect to have a better battery or even a bigger battery than what this phone is, having. And it's not, like I said, it's not the end of the world, but I wish they did put a bigger battery in this thing. I feel like that would have been a lot better and much easier to sell this phone if they did do that, but it's not the end of the world. I'm sure, there's battery cases out for this thing. You can always, plug it in or something, USB Type-C, like I stated, but I don't know. I feel like they could have done better, but I guess it's whatever at the end of the day. I don't want to hate on it too much, and get all nitpicky with it. But I can tell you what my whole takeaway from this phone is. It's a very good phone that just wasn't marketed well, in my opinion, and it's just so quirky and so average in so many ways that even the 2 ways that it might be better in, with like having a micro SD card slot in the camera at that time, it just kind of is overshadowed by the averageness of this phone. Like the IPS panel, that's average. The 3000 mAh battery, that's average. Even the 4 to 6 gigabytes of RAM, that's pretty average. The storage variants, even though it has the micro SD card slot, are very average. And I think now in 2019, especially going into 2020, I think this phone is still a very capable phone. It's still going to get you places. It's still going to be a pretty fast phone at that. But when you have phones like the Galaxy S10 and like the iPhone 11 and all these other phones, I think it's a very interesting concept, and I think it's a very good phone to pick up for the price. But I would even probably spend a little bit more money just to get a better phone rather than pick up this phone. But this phone is still very good. It still has a lot of compelling features. It has a lot of things going for it. But I do think there's better phones in the market that you can get for just a little bit more money, maybe like $50 more. You can pick up like a Galaxy S8, maybe even a Galaxy S9 you can pick up for like $200, $250 if you're lucky. This one you can probably pick up for like $100, $150, give or take here and there. So I don't know. The choice is yours, but I do think the LG G7 is a good phone at the end of the day still. So if you want to pick one up, I'll find the cheapest ones on Amazon and I'll link them down in the description below so you guys can get them from there. If you guys have any questions or you have any experience with the LG G7, let me know in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. All those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.